Hi everybody, welcome to APUSH Chapter 11 review of the Jeffersonian Republic, the years 1800 to 1812. In the 1800 election, the Federalists faced many handicaps. The Alien and Sedition Acts had made many enemies. There were feverish preparations for war with France, swelling a federal debt and requiring new taxes, and military preparations were seemingly very extravagant. The Federalists concentrated their fire on Jefferson himself, who became a victim of rumors. The rumors said that he fathered numerous mulatto children with his slave women, and rumors of a long intimacy with Sally Hemings, which was also proven to be true, as one of her sons is his descendant. A liberal in religion, Jefferson supported the separation of church and state in Virginia. He did believe in God, but preachers throughout New England thundered against his atheism. This is a political cartoon comparing Washington and Jefferson. The pro-Federalist, anti-Federalist Jefferson cartoon accuses Jefferson of sympathizing with French revolutionary despotism, showing clouds above him with snakes on the side, as opposed to Washington, who has rays of sunshine, the lion, and the eagle, which are symbolic of strength. Jefferson won by a majority of 73 electoral votes to 65 in the Revolution of 1800. New York was largely for Jefferson, largely because of Burr intensively campaigned there. Most of Jefferson's strength was in the South and the West, so the 3/5 clause of the Constitution was very decisive in his victory. Jefferson's victory was dampened by an unexpected deadlock. Jefferson, the presidential candidate, and Aaron Burr, the vice presidential candidate, received the same number of electoral votes for the presidency. Under the Constitution, the tie could only be broken by the House of Representatives. The House was controlled by Federalists who preferred Burr, but Jefferson won after a few Federalists abstained from voting. This is sometimes referred to as the Revolution of 1800. There is really no revolution in the true sense of the word, and Jefferson really did narrowly squeak to political victory, but it was the first time that political power was peacefully passed from one party to the next, and Jefferson saw his mission to restore the Republican experience, to check the growth of government power, and to halt what he considered was the decay of virtue. It was a peaceful and orderly transfer of power, and this was revolutionary. It was a remarkable achievement for any young nation, especially at this time in world history. Americans could take pride in the vigor of their experiment in democracy. Jefferson's inaugurated on March 4, 1801, in the swampy village of Washington and in a crude new capital. He spurned the horse-drawn carriage and walked to the Capitol from his boarding house, and his inaugural address was a classic statement of democratic principles. This political cartoon basically is Jefferson is drawn alongside another African-American woman, his slave and longtime sexual partner, Sally Hemings. You can read about the rest of the political cartoon so that you can easily analyze it when you pause the video. The new Capitol reflected simplicity and a frugality of Jeffersonian Republicans. This was in contrast with the elegant atmosphere of the Federalist Philadelphia, which was the former temporary capital. Jefferson extended democratic principles to etiquette. He established the rule of pell-mell at official dinners, which means seating without regard to rank. He was shockingly unconventional in receiving guests, and he started the precedent of sending messages to Congress to be read by a clerk, rather than giving speeches there. Yet Jefferson, in practice, reversed many political principles that he had championed. In practice, two Jeffersons existed. One was scholarly and a private citizen. The other was a harassed public official. He was therefore consistently inconsistent, and it is easy to quote one Jefferson to refute the other. This is a picture of Jefferson's polygraph, which basically he used to make copies of the letters he penned. Jefferson's eviction of Federalists marked the first party overturn in American history. Jefferson showed unexpected moderation. He dismissed very few public servants for political reasons, and so patronage-hungry Jeffersonians watched the Federalist appointees continue in office. Jefferson, however, was determined to undo some Federalist abuses. He pardoned the martyrs convicted under the Sedition Act. He enacted the new naturalization law of 1802, which reduced the requirement of the 14 years of residence back to 5 years. And he had Congress repeal the excise tax because it hurt farmers. Albert Gallatin proved to be the able Secretary of the Treasury. He agreed with Jefferson that the national debt was a bane rather than a blessing, and by a strict economy, they reduced the debt while balancing the budget. Jeffersonians left the Hamiltonian framework essentially intact. They did not tamper with funding national debt at par and assuming Revolutionary War debts of states. They did not launch an attack on the Bank of the United States, and they did not repeal mildly protective tariffs. In future years, they rechartered a larger bank and bolstered protective tariffs to higher levels. Jefferson's moderation cemented the Revolution of 1800 because it showed political change need not be disastrous for the defeated group. The Judiciary Act of 1801 was one of the last laws passed by the Federalists. It created 16 federal judgeships and other offices. Adams signed some commissions for Federalist midnight judges on his last night in office. This aroused bitter resentment for packing lifetime posts with anti-Jeffersonians. The new Congress quickly repealed the Judiciary Act of 1801. Jeffersonians were also after the new Chief Justice John Marshall, who had served 34 years under various presidents, who dominated the Supreme Court by intellect and personality and shaped the American legal tradition more than any other figure. He was committed to strengthening the power of the federal government. This is a picture of John Marshall, who served on the Supreme Court for 34 years from 1801 to 1835 and deeply molded constitutional law. The midnight judges presented Marshall with a historic opportunity. William Marbury appointed a justice of the peace by Adams. He sued when he learned the commission would not be delivered. He was one of the midnight judges. Marshall dismissed Marbury's suit, and in Marbury v. Madison in 1803, this enabled Marshall to address the question of who had the final authority to determine meaning of the Constitution. Marshall promoted the principle of what's called judicial review. The Supreme Court alone had final word on questions of constitutionality. Marshall inserted keystones into the arch that supports the tremendous power of the Supreme Court in American life. Jefferson also urged impeachment of Justice Samuel Chase, but the effort failed. This established the precedent of judicial independence. Early on, Jefferson reduced the military. He wanted to win friends through peaceful coercion. But the North African pirates of the Barbary States were plundering and blackmailing merchant ships that ventured into the Mediterranean, and so this was going to become a problem for Jefferson. War across the Atlantic was not part of Jefferson's mission. This is a picture of the Barbary States of North Africa and the burning of the frigate Philadelphia. You can see Tripoli here, where the burning took place, and you can pause your video to read the explanation. This is also a picture of the plundering and burning of the frigate Philadelphia in 1804. You can also pause the video to read the description. The showdown came in 1801 to 1805 in the Tripolitan War. Jefferson sent an infant army to the shores of Tripoli, where you just saw in the first map. There were 4 years of intermittent fighting. They succeeded in extorting a treaty of peace from Tripoli in 1805 for the bargain price of $60,000, which was a ransom payment for the captured Americans. Jefferson also advocated a construction of a small coastal craft. About 200 tiny gunboats were built that helped with this issue. In 1800, there was a secret pact signed. Napoleon Bonaparte had induced Spain to cede the immense region of Louisiana, including the port of New Orleans. The Spaniards at New Orleans withdrew the warehouse rights guaranteed by Pinckney's Treaty in 1795. Hoping to quiet clamor in the West, Jefferson in 1803 sent James Monroe to Paris to work there with Robert Livingston, the regular minister there. They were instructed to buy New Orleans and as much land as possible for $10 million. Napoleon suddenly decided to abandon the dream of the New World Empire and to sell all of Louisiana. He failed in effort to reconquer the sugar-rich island of Santo Domingo, which was Haiti. The slaves there struck for freedom in 1791, and the Haitian Revolution was eventually crushed, but yellow fever killed thousands of the French troops. This is a picture of Toussaint Louverture. His slave rebellion in Haiti also very briefly established the first black government in the New World, but this struck fear into the hearts of the slave owners throughout the Western Hemisphere. Without Haiti, there was no need for Louisiana's food supplies. So to keep Louisiana from the British, Napoleon decided to sell it and use the money for schemes in Europe. Livingston was shocked when the French asked him what he would give for all of Louisiana. So on April 30th, 1803, treaties signed ceding Louisiana to the United States for $15 million. That's about 3 or 4 cents an acre, and an acre is about the size of a football field. The treaties included the immense tract to west of New Orleans that would more than double the size of the United States. Once again, two Jeffersons wrestled with each other, the theorist and former strict constructionist versus the democratic visionary. Jefferson submitted treaties to the Senate while privately admitting that the purchase was unconstitutional. He gained 828,000 square miles at 3 cents an acre. The Louisiana Purchase secured the western half of the richest river valley in the world, laid the foundation for a future major power. It established a valuable precedent for future expansion on the basis of equal membership. It was imperialism with a new democratic face. It would also lead to displacement of many Indians and made very many isolationist principles of Washington's farewell operational because it was removing Europe from North America. Lewis and Clark's Corps of Discovery were sent to explore the Louisiana Territory. So in 1804, Jefferson sent his personal secretary, Meriwether Lewis, and an Army officer, William Clark, to explore the northern part of Louisiana, which took 2.5 years. It was a rich harvest of scientific observation, maps, knowledge of the Indian tribes living there, and adventure stories. And it also demonstrated the viability of overland trail to the Pacific Ocean. Thousands of missionaries, fur traders, and pioneering settlers later made their way to claim land in the Oregon country. Zebulon Pike would trek there to the headwaters of the Mississippi River in 1805 to 1806, and Pike will explore the southern part of the Louisiana Territory in 1807, where he sighted the Colorado Peak that bears his name. The Louisiana Purchase expanded fortunes of the United States and the power of the federal government. In the short term, the vast new territory and feeble reach of the government raised fears of secession and foreign intrigue. Burr, Jefferson's first-term vice president, helped justify such fears. Burr joined with the Federalist extremists to plot secession of New England and New York. Hamilton exposes and foils this conspiracy, which is part of the reason why Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton hate each other. This is a picture of a drawing by the Lewis and Clark expedition showing the Flathead Indians, and you can pause and read the entire description. Incensed, Burr challenged Hamilton to a duel, and in the duel, Hamilton shot into the air, but Burr killed Hamilton. Aaron Burr thus destroyed the last hope of effective leadership for the Federalists. Burr then turned his plotting to the trans-Mississippi West and struck a deal with General James Wilkinson, an unscrupulous military governor of Louisiana and secret agent for Spain. Wilkinson's army was to meet Burr at Natchez. When Wilkinson heard that Jefferson had learned of the plot, Wilkinson fled to New Orleans, and Burr was arrested and tried for treason. Marshall, strictly interpreting the Constitution, insisted that the guilty verdict required proof of overt acts of treason, not merely treasonous intentions. So Burr was acquitted and ended up fleeing to Europe. His actions demonstrated that it was one thing to purchase large expanses of territory, but quite another to govern them effectively. This is a map of the Louisiana Purchase, and you can pause and view the key and read the description. Jefferson triumphantly was reelected in 1804, 162 electoral votes to only 14 votes for his Federalist opponent. Napoleon provoked the renewed war with Britain, so the conflict would rage for the next 11 years. And during the first 2 years of the war, maritime United States enjoyed commercial pickings. In 1805, the Battle of Trafalgar, Lord Nelson smashed the French and Spanish fleets and ensured Britain's supremacy on the sea. The Battle of Austerlitz in Austria, the Battle of the Three Emperors, Napoleon crushed the Austrian and Russian armies and ensured his mastery on land. In 1806, London issues the Orders in Council, which closed ports under French control to foreign shipping, including American, unless the vessels stopped at a British port first. Napoleon strikes back as a result and orders seizure of all merchant ships, including American, that entered British ports. So American vessels were caught in the crossfire, and there was no way to trade with one nation without antagonizing another. Impressment also upset the Americans. Impressment is the forced conscription of sailors by the British. Some 6,000 U.S. citizens were impressed into military service by the British from 1808 to 1811. In the Chesapeake Affair, which occurred in 1807, the British frigate stopped the U.S. frigate, the Chesapeake, 10 miles off the coast of Virginia. The British captain demanded 4 alleged deserters. London had never claimed the right to seize sailors from a foreign warship. The American commander refused the demand, and the British fired 3 devastating broadsides at close range. 3 Americans were killed and 18 were wounded. 4 deserters were taken, and the Chesapeake limped back into port. Britain clearly was wrong, as the London Foreign Office admitted. London's contrition availed little as the roar of anger swelled from infuriated Americans. Jefferson could have easily had war if he wanted it. Honor would not permit submission to the British and French mistreatment, but the United States was not ready for war. Warring nations needed the United States for raw materials and foodstuffs, so Jefferson thought if America cut off exports, the offending powers would relent. So Congress issues, in turn, the Embargo Act of 1807, which forbade export of all goods from the United States, whether American or foreign ships. And this embodied Jefferson's idea of peaceful coercion. This is a picture of a political cartoon we viewed in class called The Prairie Dog Sickened at the Sting of the Hornet. This is an anti-Jeffersonian satire criticizing his negotiations for the purchase of West Florida in 1804. You can pause your video and read the rest. The American economy was devastated by the embargo long before Britain or France began to bend. The enormously illicit trade mushroomed in 1808, especially along the Canadian border. The embargo revived the Federalist Party. And on March 1st, 1809, 3 days before Jefferson retired, Congress repeals the embargo and passes the Non-Intercourse Act, which formally opens trade with all nations except for Britain and France. This is a picture of the launching of the ship Fame. Jefferson's embargo throttled thriving New England shipyards like this one, stirring bitter resentment. The Embargo Act failed because Jefferson underestimated the British determination, overestimated the dependence of both belligerents on American trade, and miscalculated the unpopularity of a self-crucifying weapon and the difficulty of enforcing it. New England plucked the new prosperity from the ugly jaws of the embargo. The resourceful Yankees reopened old factories and began to erect new ones. The foundations of America's modern industrial might lay behind the protective wall of the embargo. Jefferson, who was a avowed critic of factories, may have done more for manufacturing as a result of the embargo than Hamilton, which was a very outspoken friend of industry. Madison takes the oath of office March 4th, 1809, just as the conflict in Europe escalated. The Non-Intercourse Act in 1809 would expire in 1810, so Congress dismantled the embargo completely with a bargaining measure called Macon's Bill No. 2. If either Britain or France repealed its commercial restrictions, America would restore its embargo against the non-repealing nation. To Madison, this bill was a shameful capitulation. But Macon's Bill No. 2 caused the French to imply that their restrictions might be repealed. Madison did not trust Napoleon, but he took a gamble, and the threat of the exclusive U.S. trade with France would lead to the British to repeal restrictions, and that's what he was hoping for. He gave the British 3 months to revoke the Orders in Council and reopen Atlantic to neutral trade, but the British refused, and Madison's gamble had failed. This is a political cartoon that we viewed in class also, showing the British Prime Minister William Pitt and the French Emperor Napoleon dividing up the world. You can pause and read the entire description. When the 12th Congress met in late 1811, older submission men replaced by young hotheads. Many were from the South and West. Many of these men were dubbed war hawks by the Federalists. They were newcomers who advocated war with England. They also wanted to destroy the renewed Indian threat for settlers moving to Trans-Allegheny wilderness. So 2 Shawnee brothers, Tecumseh and Tenskwatawa, known to non-Indians as the Prophet, decided to resist the tide of white encroachment. They began to form the Confederacy of all tribes west of the Mississippi. Frontiersmen and their warhawk spokesmen became convinced that the British in Canada were nourishing the Indians' growing strength. So in 1811, William Henry Harrison gathered an army and advanced on Tecumseh's headquarters. Tecumseh was absent, but the Prophet attacked Harrison's army with a small force of Shawnees. The Shawnees were routed and their settlements were burned. This was the Battle of Tippecanoe, and it made Harrison a national hero. It discredited the Prophet and drove Tecumseh into an alliance with the British. During America's war with Britain, Tecumseh fought for England until he was killed in 1813 at the Battle of the Thames. With his death, the dream of an Indian confederacy would perish. Pushed by warhawks and upset by Indian attacks, James Madison believed war with England was inevitable by 1812. Madison also believed the war would restore faith in the Republican experiment, so Congress approves the request for war in June. Madison is the first president to ask for a declaration of war. The Republicans, especially the South and West, supported the war, while the Federalists, especially from New England, opposed it. Many New Englanders refused to support the war and actually helped the British, so the United States went to war badly divided by party and by section. This political cartoon is also something that we looked at in class, which shows the united we stand, divided we fall, the pillars of liberty and independence, and one man saying, "This pillar shall not stand. I'm determined to support a just and necessary war," and the other man saying, "This pillar must come down. I am a friend of peace." So it shows the two sides warring over whether to go to war in 1812. You can pause the video and read the rest of it. And this is the chronology for the chapter.